Hi, Dan Sheridan here. I want to talk to you about a government measuring tool. No, it's not something you can buy at the hardware store. Let me ask you a question. What is your political persuasion? Are you left-wing or right-wing? Or do you consider yourself a moderate or a centrist? Well, we hear these labels all the time. On the left are the Democrats. Then there are those who are on the extreme left. They're the extreme Democrats. And then there are those on the right. Those are the Republicans. But there's also those on the extreme right, the extreme Republicans. And then there are those moderates or centrists. These may side with one party or the other depending on the circumstances. Well, basically, left and right are descriptions used in terms of political parties. But I want to show you a fourth option. Now, you may not be aware of it, but I think you'll agree it's an option we'll all agree on. Agree on political matters? Ha, yeah, right, you're probably saying. No, seriously, please be patient and hear me out. I know you're going to agree with me on this. The Founding Fathers had a means of measuring government as well, but it was in terms of political power, not parties. Let me illustrate it this way. Imagine a line. You can draw it on a piece of paper if you want. On the left of the line, write 100%. On the right, write 0%. The far left is tyranny, and the far right is anarchy. Now, that's how the Founding Fathers measured political systems. They measured them in terms of the amount of coercive power, not parties. Measuring government this way is a wiser method. It enables us to find the true balanced center between two extremes. Often party devotion blinds us from finding the true balanced center, and that's because party people tend to overlook their own party's faults because they're more concerned with defeating the other party. I mean, let's face it, how often do we see party people crying tyranny when the other party does what their own party has always done? In other words, both parties are closer to the left side of the government measuring tool, but the party faithful are only indignant when the other party does it. But the Founders' measuring tool could cure us of party blindness, and that's because the Founders' method is party blind, and it eliminates hypocrisy. History teaches us that nations are constantly swinging back and forth between tyranny and anarchy. And here's how the simple story goes. The people are dominated by a tyrant, and then they rebel. The tyrant's taken out of the way, and a new power struggle begins with anarchy and chaos reigning. Then a new tyrant takes over and restores order. People went from tyranny to anarchy, and then back to tyranny. It seems that people have been unable to find the balanced center. Alexander Hamilton talked about the horror and disgust those who study history felt when observing that nations are always in a state of perpetual vibration between the extremes of tyranny and anarchy. George Washington also said there is a natural and necessary progression from the extreme of anarchy to the extreme of tyranny. Now notice what the Founders considered extreme, not the wings of political parties, but the extremes of anarchy and tyranny. America faced this same historical challenge in the 1780s. They threw off tyrannical King George. His government was too far to the left, closer to the 100% on our government measuring tool. That was tyranny. Then, under the Articles of Confederation, we went the opposite extreme. We were closer to the 0% side of the government measuring tool on the far right. That's anarchy. America almost fell apart. It was chaotic. On one occasion, the chaos was so troubling that some people appealed to George Washington to become King George I of America, and George Washington was horrified at the suggestion. Would America follow the natural progression of tyranny to anarchy and then back to tyranny? Many thought it just might happen. Well, thankfully, a constitutional convention was called to find the balanced center. At the convention, the Founders established a system of people's law where the government is kept under our control in the balanced center. The Constitution provides just enough government to protect us, but not too much to tyrannize us. Let's examine the system a little bit. What comes to mind when you hear the phrase, the federal government? Well, most immediately think of Washington. I bet you probably did. Most of us do. But that's only partially accurate. Our federal system of government was invented at the Constitutional Convention. There was nothing like it before 1787. The word federal is derived from confederation, and before 1787, it was used as an adjective to describe a confederation. The Founding Fathers mingled elements of a national government with those of a confederation and called it federal. So our federal system of government consists of the national and state governments. I know, we call the national government the federal government, but technically that's not accurate. The state and county governments are governments too, and they are part of the system. The powers of government are dispersed in the United States. Each level of government has a jurisdiction in which other levels have no authority. The national government is limited to the enumerated powers granted to it in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. The states are also limited in the Constitution and in their own state constitutions. Within the states, there are counties, cities, and towns as well. It keeps the whole system balanced. This is constitutionalism, dispersed power which includes local, state, and the national government, and they're all bound by written constitutions. That's what the founders called self-government. The founders didn't believe government is capable of directing all human affairs. They knew man is limited and fallible. Man's a fallible creature, and as a result, every institution of man is fallible as well. They didn't think that human error magically disappears when men meet together in Congress. Congressional meetings aren't some kind of magical act where men become gods. That's why they believe that man, especially government, should be limited. And that's why they created the Constitution. And remember, a constitution is a form of government written on paper. This is a very important principle, and it's unique to America, having written constitutions. However, the founders wanted more than just limited government on paper. They were fully aware that politicians ignore or reconstruct paper limitations. So they went beyond a paper limitation and designed in the form of government itself a built-in restraint system. This is really genius, and here's how they did it. They did it, first of all, by separating the government into three branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. Plus, they divided the legislative body into two houses. So, for any law to be passed, it requires the approval of all three branches. First, it must go through both houses of Congress, then signed by the president. If the president vetoes it, it has to be repassed by 2/3 majorities in both houses. That's not all. If the courts deem a law to be unconstitutional, they don't have to enforce it. And not only that, the courts need the cooperation of the executive branch to use force. So with this built-in restraint system, the founders hoped that each branch would be jealous of its prerogatives and provide a check against other branches usurping constitutional powers. Now remember this too, the states are part of this restraint system as well. States existed before the national government. The national government is a creature of the states, a very important principle. When creating our national government, the states simply yielded to it some of their powers, but they still retained power in their own jurisdictions. And the founding fathers expected each level of government to be jealous of its jurisdiction and check any grasping of unconstitutional powers. Now, believe it or not, there's more. The Constitution has another built-in safeguard in the election process. You see, each branch of government is independent in its actions because each branch is selected by different electorates. The members of the House are chosen by the people in their districts. The members of the Senate were originally chosen by the state legislatures and represented the state governments. However, we know that changed later. Now, senators are elected directly by the people. The president was chosen by the Electoral College, and they were a distinct group of people chosen for that very occasion. Judges were appointed by the president with the advice of the Senate. But once the judges were appointed, however, they were completely independent because they served for life. In other words, once appointed, they didn't have to worry about being booted off the bench if they didn't agree with the president on a particular case. So we see how each branch is independent of the other, and plus, no branch can use force against another branch. Well, there's one more thing to notice. The Constitution has an admirable recognition of human fallibility in that it makes provision for an amendment process. With this provision, the founders were saying that even though they were giving us their best effort to find the balanced center, they recognized that it wasn't perfect. They hoped that their posterity, that's us, would improve upon their work if we found better ways to maintain the balanced center. This is a unique thing in the history of the world, and we cannot overestimate it. Our founders, unlike kings and monarchs of old, didn't believe they were infallible gods whose laws were divine. They admitted they were fallible men whose laws could be revised and improved upon. That's something we should really be proud of and thankful for. All right, let's sum up. The Founding Fathers measured government in terms of coercive power, not parties. The government measuring tool which we've designed here doesn't see extremes in terms of wings of a political party. Instead, tyranny is on the extreme left and anarchy on the extreme right. And the Constitution was intended to put us in the center of our government measuring tool. We need government to protect our lives and property. However, we don't want too much or too little. We want to avoid the extremes of anarchy and tyranny. Now, who could possibly disagree with this? No American, whatever party he or she belongs to, wants tyranny or anarchy. We're united in this. Isn't that something? This is a political principle we all agree on. It brings us together. We're all Federalists or centrists, but the title or name isn't important. The principle is. We can call it whatever we want. Now, of course, we're still going to disagree and argue from time to time when we hammer out the details, but we are one when it comes to the government measuring tool. So let's use this tool often. Let's measure all parties and their practices with our government measuring tool and make sure that we, the people, maintain the balanced center. This is Dan Sheridan. Thanks for listening. I really hope you learned something. And remember this, we're in this together.